All right, this video is going to be part of the Communication Formula series. And today we're going to be talking about the role of walls. So this is in the beginning of the book, and it's one of the key core concepts of why we use mindful communication, right? And when I think of the concept of walls, what I was referring to are defenses, right? Thinking about a fortress. I have walls up to protect me from whatever it is on the outside world. And what's behind those walls, right? What is it that I'm protecting by putting walls up? And that could take many forms, and we'll talk about that. But what I'm protecting is my ego. And that may sound bad, especially, for me, someone with a massive ego. But it's not about that. It's about the ego is I. It's me. It's how I view myself. It's my sense of self. It's my self-esteem. So if I'm having an argument with somebody, essentially what they're telling me in my head is that I'm wrong. Now, sometimes that's just on the surface, or you could be telling me I'm wrong in my political beliefs. Some of us are more sensitive than others in that area, or take that more personally. You could be telling me I'm wrong about a sports team, and I probably won't, maybe you'll get me a little heated. Me personally, I don't give a shit. But even those little disagreements, those little arguments that we have between people, sometimes that could trigger something much deeper in us. That's why sometimes when somebody blows up, when we're having a disagreement or over something seemingly insignificant, and somebody blows up and they take it really personally, right? This is something that connects to a deeper level. And we could have a whole conversation about our core beliefs and what makes us tick, and basically those just come down to these sensitivities. And you could even say those are holes in the walls that I have up, and the protective barriers I have between me and my ego, the sense of self and who I am. So sometimes an argument is not just an argument about sports or a couple's disagreement. A lot of times those arguments are about, you are invalidating me. You're telling me not that I'm wrong in this issue, but that I'm wrong. So right away, when we go into a disagreement, we're already off on a bad foot. Because now, and again, it's not for everyone. Some people are less sensitive, and it depends on the issue. But in examples that I use in the book, these are dealing with difficult people, difficult situations, dealing with the difficulties within ourselves. And these issues could really be consequential, and they could really prompt someone to have their walls and defenses up. Okay, so what is a wall essentially? Well, it's nothing physical in this sense. Maybe it is. Maybe the wall is I'm sitting behind my room with the door closed and not wanting to talk to you, right? And there actually is a physical barrier. Maybe I was wrong. So you maybe could put literal physical barriers up and walls between you and somebody else in that exchange, right? There is no exchange. Now, within an exchange, sometimes the wall is a lot of those relationship blocking behaviors that we talk about later in the book, right? It could be, off the top of my head, being defensive, not listening, trying to argue a point, trying to rationalize. And you could think about the perfect example of this would be within a political conversation. How often do those exchanges actually amount to anything? Almost never, right? Because if I'm going into the situation and I'm having a debate, and we go back to what we talk about at the beginning of the book, right? If we're in a sparring match or we're in a striking match, or I'm just trying to win on points, yeah, okay, hey, I won the debate. Yeah, give me a trophy, give me a medal. I get to go home, show it off to all my friends. I made you look stupid. But at the end of the day, if we're having a political debate and I actually want to change somebody's mind, I'm not going to use those striking. I'm not going to try to win on points, because then what happens? We go into that situation. Not only do we have our walls and our defenses up, maybe we should have talked about this about the book, is you have the defenses like a shield, but then what about your sword? So not only do you want to not have the shield, the person have their shield up, You don't want them to their sort of, because you're not going to be able to get through to them. You're not going to be able to have that exchange when it's just a constant back and forth. So that's what walls are, right? And those are the purpose they serve, is that person is trying to protect themselves, but when you're jousting at them, when you're stabbing at them, well, they need to protect themselves, and what do they naturally do? They stab back. Now, as we talk about some of the purposes of why we do this and why we use mindful communication, right? Some of the reason is to preserve healthy relationships, to get our needs met, to come to a resolution. None of those things are really going to happen, or we have to go and fight each other till we're both exhausted and willing to come to a resolution and use skills, but why not avoid that right off the bat? So it's really important that we lower walls, and a lot of the skills that we're going to talk about in the book are all designed to do that, because the second a wall goes up, you're in a bad spot. You want to avoid that altogether. Now, naturally, if we're coming into, hey, we've acknowledged there's a disagreement, what's the first thing we do? All right, let's put the fortress walls up, let's get out the shield, the sword, the cannons, and let's have at it, right? So often we're coming in and the walls are going to be up already. Now, granted, if you're going to confront someone in a situation, there are ways to do it so that doesn't happen right off the bat, but we talk about some of the skills like disarming, and that's what the disarming effect does, literally by the word disarming. So we go into these situations and we want to do everything we can to lower their walls. So they do not feel like you are a threat to their ego. And again, the ego is not necessarily a bad thing. It's our sense of self and who we are. And sometimes when people have experienced trauma, that sense of self is fragile. And there's a lot of barriers and things up to protect that fragile ego, which is the fragile sense of self, not having a stable, sturdy sense of who you are, and being more sensitive to your environment right there. I mean, that's a good definition of a sensitive person. It often would correlate with that unstable sense of self. Where did that come from? Maybe it is from trauma too. So that's just something to think about, and this is really one of those more general topics that I'm talking about, that as you go through and read the book, to truly understand what walls are and why they're so toxic. Because if I'm trying to get through to somebody and we're sitting there arguing, flinging arrows, swords, shield, back and forth, you're just going to exhaust yourself. You're going to walk away from that situation, and none of the goals of mindful communication, none of your goals of what you wanted out of that conversation are going to be met, and it's just going to make it harder in the future. It's going to make those dynamics even more difficult, because you already have the bruises and history of fighting that person, and now we're going back into it. So really be mindful of some of those concepts in the book and understand. This is why I talk about this before I go into the relationship blocking behaviors and the skills. The relationship blocking behaviors, if you want to sum it up, are things that will raise people's walls, make them more likely to be defensive and offensive. And then the skills are ones that are designed to make sure the walls go down, stay down, and how to have that productive exchange within that conversation. So again, always be mindful of walls. Keep reading, check out how those skills, principles will lower the walls, and always keep that in mind. Right? I mean, this is something that's done. I saw a TikTok on this about a guy talking about sales in a sales situation, right? And so it's not always about the ego, right? It could be, I'm defensive because I feel like you're trying to sell me something. You're trying to get my money, or you have an agenda, so I'm going to have my walls up and be protective. So it does apply in other situations, and there's other ways to disarm people so that they don't necessarily think that you're out to get their money, their agenda, you're out to screw them over. And it was interesting, and it was kind of funny, this came up today, but yeah, I saw the TikTok, some business guru, I don't know, but he was saying, okay, let's say I'm in a sales situation and I'm trying to sell something to a potential client, and they say to me, why should I buy your product? Well, what is the natural salesperson's response. Well, I'm going to start to tell you why, right? And that's going to keep that person's walls up. That's going to keep their guard up. But instead, he said, what if you took a different approach, said, look, actually, I don't know if I'm the right customer for you. I don't know yet, based on what you told me. I don't know if we are the best for you. I don't know if I can meet your needs. Will you tell me more about what you're looking for? So do you see how that changes that dynamic? So that, like, and not in a mental health, emotional way, right? It's all psychology, but this is something, a tactic this individual did to lower that person's walls. Now they don't think, oh, this guy's just out to sell me. Hey, maybe he is trying to see what's in my best interest. And so this comes quite a bit, right? Like when we're pushing someone's boundary, I'm trying to push and get you to do something. This kind of same thing that happens in dating often, right? The more somebody pushes, even if they're like the most attractive, whatever, if they seem so interested, you're like, what's wrong with this situation? What's wrong with this? Why are they so interested? Why are they don't even know me? So there is a psychology. The more you push, the more people pull away, and we talk about that in the book as well. So it's kind of like, it's almost like taking a cooler approach, right? I'm not trying to fix your agenda. I'm not trying to make you feel bad about yourself. I just want to understand. And that's a big concept as well, of seeking to understand. So you could apply that to a lot of different situations. So keep that in mind moving forward as you read the book. Keep that in mind as you practice these things, these principles and skills in different situations. Because at the end of the day, I talk about this throughout the book, that sometimes, it's more about what you don't do. And if you could just find ways to keep their walls down, everything else falls into place. You'll find yourself naturally using those skills that are in the book. You don't have to use every skill every time. You don't have to sit there and be totally calculated. The more you practice these things, the less you have to think about it, and the less maybe calculated you are. Like, okay, I have to use this and the disarming technique, and I have to use, I got to remove this relationship blocking behavior, and you don't have to think about that quite as much. It just comes. It's going to flow naturally. So just remember, nothing good will happen if the walls are up. None of the goals in mindful communication, or if they do, it's going to be a long trodden battle that is completely unnecessary. And I did write this in the book as well, remembering that every time, it's so easy to get someone to raise their walls up. If they feel like you're even an ounce of a threat, boom, they're up again. And it's much harder to lower the walls than it is to bring them up. So it could just be one mistake that it's going to be one move, and then you're going to need 3 moves to bring it back down. It'll be 1 step forward, 3 steps back every time your walls raise. So you got to be very, very careful with that. So go check that out, try that, keep reading the book, and hopefully you find this helpful.